Welcome to Hidden Habitat Land Management, the channel where we discuss habitat techniques and hunting tips for the small property owner. Today I wanted to talk about perimeter access versus interior access on a property. A lot of properties, already have an existing interior driveway or trail that, basically cuts through the middle of the property, whether that's due to, elevation or the path of least resistance. But I wanted to look at one, where, if you're starting from scratch, how a perimeter access trail would be more beneficial than an interior trail. So on this property, that your access is coming in from this road, and so a southwest wind would be the worst case scenario for you to hunt. So anything, no matter which side of the property you're coming from, whether it's on the northern side or the southern side, a southwest wind is going to blow your scent out here into the middle of the property. Basically going to avoid hunting anytime we have a southwest wind. Let's start with an interior road that would be pretty common on most properties. So it's just kind of cutting up through the middle this way, and then maybe you have some trails shutting off to get to your stands, maybe along the corners, something that looks kind of like this. A lot of properties have this type of setup. So if we were going to look at this from an access and wind perspective, how would you go about getting in without at some point blowing your scent into the property? So let's start with a north wind. When you first come in, your wind's blowing kind of this way towards the neighboring property, and you could probably get away with it until you get closer towards the middle. But then once you get up this direction, you really can't hunt these stands very well without blowing up at least a portion of the property. So, you're kind of limiting all of this down here by having an interior trail. Now let's look at a south wind. So similar kind of situation when you're at the entranceway of the property with the south wind, you could kind of hunt maybe until you get to this first path and have your scent blowing out onto the neighboring property. By the time you get to the center of the property, your scent dispersal has essentially permeated this whole upper section up here. Now let's look at a west wind. A west wind, even from the very beginning of your access, you're already going to be alerting deer on this whole right half of the property, the whole eastern half of the property. And so, essentially this whole section has been permeated with scent. And lastly, if we look at an east wind, this would be probably the most ideal wind to hunt with an interior access, but it's also, in most areas, it's probably the least common wind. So you could get away with hunting this whole kind of bottom half here, and most of your scent would be blowing off the property. Now, once you get up here, it is blowing back this direction, but if you hunted this lower section, you could probably get away with it, but still not ideal. Now let's look at this property with perimeter access trails. So if you notice, I've got a trail kind of along this north and west perimeter, and then the south and east perimeter. So if we start with the northerly wind, like in the previous example, if you're walking along this southern perimeter trail, your scent is essentially blowing out onto the neighboring property for pretty much the entire walk in. And even as you get up this direction, you'll have a little bit of scent dispersal as your scent cone expands. Think of it as like a triangle. You'll have a little bit down this direction, and it'll expand out this way on the neighboring property, but you're only really contaminating this section with the south wind. In the same way, let's look at a wind coming from the south. So a wind coming from the south, you'd want to access on this northern side, so your scent is blowing out across the neighboring property this way. And at no point has your scent blown into the property itself. If we look at a west wind next, this is a west wind is a little bit trickier, but if you stay along this side of the property, you're still limiting. Most of your scent cone is going to drift kind of along the property line as opposed to, into the property. And then once you get on this eastern side, eastern border, your scent's actually going to be drifting back out onto the neighboring property. So you could still get away with a west wind. You just have to be careful of any drift if it starts to kind of shift from the southwest. And again, on an east wind, I mean, not very common, but if you had an east wind, you could access on this side of the property, and your scent would be blowing back out onto the neighbors. So this is typically why I recommend perimeter access on most properties. Occasionally, you could get a property that sets up for an interior access, but those are, I would say, special circumstances most of the time. So by using your perimeter access, you can hunt uh, most of this property without contaminating the interior. Your scent, as long as you're accessing on the appropriate side based on the wind direction, your scent is blowing onto the neighboring properties, and you're keeping this section, the interior, scent free, and providing that security and not alerting the deer. Hopefully that provides some good examples of interior versus exterior access, and stick around for more content on habitat design. Thanks for watching, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe so you can get more content about how to improve the hunting on your property.